Welcome to the Sports Trading Card Hall of Fame. Today I'm going to be telling one of my stories of cardboard, which in this case is going to be talking about the importance of bubblegum well, not bubblegum, but gum for the evolution of sports cards. Now, right off the bat, I need to make something clear. There's no such thing as a true invention. Everything out there that is innovated is something that was going to be discovered at some point anyway. Every path we go down, there are a couple of options. It could be any one of those. We just happen to go down a particular path, but we are exploring and discovering what is already either there or there to be discovered. So nobody creates something out of thin air. And for sports cards, there was a bridge that was going to need to happen between the way that sports cards and trading cards overall, but really sports cards, were in the early 20th century, late 19th century, early 20th century, to where they would get to in the late 20th century as sports cards. That bridge, whatever it was going to be something related to marketing toward kids. Gum is what happened to be that bridge. But gum was the most logical choice, probably the most logical choice, and we'll see why that is in a minute. And so it's important that we had that bridge and that it was the right type of bridge. But again, it was probably inevitable. It was probably going to come down to gum, if not gum, something very similar to gum regardless. So sports cards started off as, well, all trading cards started off as inserts in packaging for adults. It was cigarettes and tobacco. And whether they were intended for adults to give to kids to entertain them or something just kind of interesting in the packaging, I don't think we'll ever fully know exactly what the intent was for the early trading cards that were included in packs of cigarettes. But over time, it did become a lot more focused on something for kids because trading cards, some trading cards happen to be about sports, but very few of them. So sports images were just something on trading cards, but eventually they started to get collectible as athletes, as baseball players became really famous and started to get a following. And so as the sport of baseball got bigger and athletes got bigger, they became more iconic. And as they became more iconic, that meant that these sports cards could become the kinds of things people wanted to collect. But early on, it didn't make sense for them to be focused on kids because early on, they were athletic clubs. They weren't city icons. They were representative of clubs, either representative of a club organization or they were a club of players who liked to come together and play baseball. And so the whole idea of the iconic hero that we're used to now, in the early days, that really wasn't the nature of it. But by the early 20th century, it was. Baseball was a very popular sport that now had bleachers full of fans, and they were representing different towns. So the whole nature of the iconic stature of baseball players, which is the reason why we collect sports cards, and obviously with boxing as well, that was very much a component of idol worship for kids. So by the early 20th century, sports cards really were more intended for kids than they were for adults. Or maybe it was a balance. But that means that if you had, say, the T206 set, the famous T206 set, this came with tobacco. But it was intended for the adults to either collect them or give them to their kids. It was not intended for the kids to get them on their own. That's an important aspect of it. So that meant that for kids to collect sports cards in the early 20th century, somebody had to be collecting them for them. Eventually, that would not work. That model just doesn't really work too well. And so there would need to be a direct market to kids. That bridge could come in one of different ways. There was a period at one point where Cracker Jack was making baseball cards. But Cracker Jack didn't need to do that because Cracker Jack sold well enough on their own and they could put any type of prize in their boxes and it would work just as well. They didn't have to pay any licensing fees. For crying out loud, they didn't have to take the time to get a photo and then get the ability to reproduce those photos for cards. They could do anything, and that's what they did. So Cracker Jack wasn't a logical path. Now, cookies is another area where we have seen cards. I mean, even with Mother's cookies, we saw cards come with cookies. And that's a decent enough idea. But the problem with cookies, and really with Cracker Jacks as well, is the oils. With Cracker Jacks, you really want to sheathe that card in a protective layer so that when you pull it out of the box of caramel corn, the caramel isn't on the card. So it's a little bit more laborious. Cookies is very similar because they have oils and the cookies break down. And so if you have cards in with cookies, you're going to get oils on the cards, which can damage cards. That's not ideal. But it also is a little bit limited in how well you can sell to kids because it's a little bit more of an intentional purchase, but it also has a shelf life, as do Cracker Jacks. Bubblegum doesn't really have a shelf life, it has a half-life. Gum can last for a long time, and it's very inexpensive, but it's also something that's it fits very much with kids. Because if you think about it, kids are energetic. Take right here. I'm in an apartment. Upstairs from me is a kid. And his mom got him a little trampoline, which is a brilliant idea. So he can go and burn off his kid energy jumping up and down on a trampoline rather than flying around in this little tiny apartment like a cat with the zoomies. It's a brilliant idea that I just wish that she didn't put it in the middle of the floor where the floor bounces the most and squeaks the most. So that's annoying, but the kid's got to burn off energy. And that's what gum does. Gum is a great opportunity to take fidgety people and calm them down a little bit. So gum is ideal for kids, and it has a good flavor that works for kids usually. So it does all the things it needs to do, and it's not expensive. So it's ideal for marketing to kids. And so by associating with gum, it was a perfect marriage because it was a product that was perfectly geared toward kids. Kids could buy it, they could associate with it really well. I mean, nowadays, when you think about candy for kids, there's a broad range of candy, but there wasn't as much back then. And so prepackaged candy was a lot more rare, and gum was one of the few things that really worked in that space. So it was one of the few options that existed at the time. But gum has different opportunities, because like in the post-war era, cards were now known as bubblegum cards. Pre-war, they were becoming bubblegum cards, but in the post-war era, they were known as bubblegum cards. They had finally bridged that gap to where now baseball cards, sports cards, were associated with gum, straight across the table. But it got to such a point in the 1950s that, like my mom, she said that she used to buy packs of Topps cards strictly for the gum. She'd open the pack, throw the cards away, and chew the gum. What I'm curious about is why didn't you just buy a gumball? Because the gumball tastes a lot better and you don't have to worry about the cards. But it became ubiquitous. It just became a standard thing. And it's not so much that she didn't want the cards as much as there was an association of if you get that pack of Topps and you get the stick of Topps gum, which wasn't very good, she was very well aware of that, there's something special about it having other things, even if you don't really care about it. But it added something serious to sports cards that was really important for kids, because now there was something fun and special about the gum, but there was something serious about the cards. And so it allowed cards to start to make an evolution toward where this became a serious pastime for kids, something that they paid attention to. The gum caught their eye and got them to go purchase the cards, but then the cards would start to continue that process. And it was a perfect way of basically laying out the blueprint for us to transition from tobacco cards through gum cards to trading cards. So by the time that you got to the 1970s, bubblegum cards had become trading cards. Now the gum was incidental. It was along with the baseball cards. By the time we got to the 1980s, it was now starting to feel like, why in the world is the gum still here? But the reality is, we were asking that question not in the mid-80s, we were asking it in the late 80s. As you got into the late 80s, into the early 90s, we were now sophisticated collectors. We weren't kids anymore. In the early 80s, we were still kids and we cared about the gum. The gum wasn't critical, but it was an important part of the process because you bought your cards and you got your gum and you chewed your gum. That's the way that it worked. It was a combination of the two. By the late 80s, it didn't make any sense anymore, and so it was easing away. But I want you to keep something in mind. When in 1980 and 81 we had the court battle over can Topps really have a monopoly over baseball cards, and the big thing at the center of it all was can Topps be the only one to have gum? When Fleer made their card set in 1981, it didn't have stickers in it. They were selling stickers, but they were selling stickers in their own packaging. In their Fleer baseball card packs, they had gum, not stickers, they had gum. That's what they wanted in there. It was important for them and for Don Russ to have gum. Now, Don Russ shifted completely over to a puzzle right from the outset. Fleer, they really wanted to have gum in their packs. But after 1 year, they decided to go over to stickers. So even in 1981, the importance, as far as the companies were concerned, with having gum in the packs still was a strong enough aspect where they felt that they needed to have it, and they were willing to go to court to get a determination of can there only be one company that's allowed to have gum in their packs or multiple companies. And like I said, by 1990, this seems stupid. Why is there still this dumb gum, this terrible gum in our packs? But again, we were now older. We were now serious. If we were going to have gum, we were going to get, I don't know, juicy fruit or something like that. We were going to get a real type of gum. And interestingly, one of the last packs ever to have gum was Pro Set, where they had a really good type of gum in their packs. They only did it one time. And when you look at it, you go, if you're going to have gum in your packs, it's going to be that. It was a gum very similar to Bazooka. But Bazooka didn't need to have cards with their gum. They did at one point, but only briefly, like with Cracker Jack, Bazooka sold itself. And so they could just put their little comics in there and that was good enough. Cracker Jacks put their little games, their little prizes in there, and that was good enough. For quality products, they didn't need cards. And so cards allowed the cheapest manufacturing company, Reed Topps, to be able to make to be able to sell gum for a long time, even after people stopped caring about gum. And it's amazing to think that even by 1991, they still had gum in their packs, which at this point you would think, wouldn't they want to cut out that cost? I mean, they still had rack packs and other things being sold at the time that did not have gum in them. But the reason that I said that gum was really good versus things like Cracker Jacks or cookies, because gum doesn't damage the cards, is because that's one of the really good things about having gum in packs, is the fact that it can last for a long period of time and not damage cards. I know this sounds stupid today, because today if you open up a pack of 1991 Topps baseball cards, there's a good chance that you're going to have two cards that are damaged, one from wax staining, the other from the gum. But that's because moisture got in there and damaged the gum. That's a very different issue than what was happening in the past, which is that gum could be there for a long period of time. And so somebody in 1956 could find a pack of 1953 Topps cards and still collect the cards and still chew the gum. It was a stable product, and it allowed the cards to hold up over time. And the reason I say that's important is because we were opening those 1950s packs of cards in the 1980s and 1990s and even today, and the cards are still in good shape. If you had cookies in there, if you had something with an oil, that oil would have impacted all the cards and probably damaged them, which means that now these cards are still in good shape all these years later for us as modern collectors. So we are blessed to have that opportunity. You can still open up a cello pack of 1991 Topps that has gum in it, and you can see that it's actually in great shape. So the fact that, don't let the wax packs and the gum that has gotten moisture and damaged cards, don't let that confuse you from the fact that gum is a great thing. for helping us evolve cards over the years and lay out the foundation for us to eventually, by the 1990s, no longer have tobacco cards or cigarette cards or bubblegum cards or even trading cards. By the 1990s, we had sports cards. And that was very heavily impacted by the fact that gum was able to make it justifiable for cards to be made and made it interesting for kids to want to pursue cards. It was that middle step to go from dad giving kids something that came with his product to something that was a whole market for kids that then became a whole market for people who were still hanging on to their childhood. So I hope that people will at least respect that bubblegum was an important part in the evolution of cards and help to lay the foundation for our ability now to collect cards as we do. I certainly give it respect. I still do wish that they had stopped putting gum into packs in the late 80s because I really don't think it was necessary then. But it is fun to open a pack and still have a piece of that history and just kind of smirk and go, yeah. Why they were doing this, I don't know. Why it was so cheap, I don't know. But at any rate, so yeah, that is the story of cardboard that I have for this topic. Thank you very much for following along. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, I do urge you to do so. Definitely take the time to check out the various stories that I have of the history of sports cards that I go subject by subject over time and see what topics I elevate to the binder of fame. Because this is a channel dedicated to the history of sports cards. That's really what I want to do here, and this is an important part of that story. So yeah, again, check out those videos. Thank you for watching.